Three, two. Hello and welcome. This is once again another amazing person within the games industry. I'm here with Dani Dee, who is writing, producing, probably doing 20 other things, maybe for Elo Girls. I think we had a quick discussion. Hi Elo Girls, which is a narrative game about joining an all-female esports team, the relationships, the love, the tragedy, the competition. It is, even thinking about esports now, like it is a lot to get into. Well, welcome, Dani. Welcome here.
Thank you.
And I guess the first off question is esports. Like, what made you want to dive into esports as sort of a narrative background to all these characters that you've created?
hmm Well, I will just be very clear and say upfront that it's because I am a big fan of esports myself. Um, I could probably say that I've been following some form of competitive gaming for a really long time now, like something like at least over a decade. It's been over a decade since I've been like pretty intensely into that scene. And it's interesting because it used to be there was like an organization called Major League Gaming, MLG. That was like the big one way back when. But then we started to see it shift closer or further towards just calling it esports in general. So then you've also got like the fighting game community, the FGC, but that's, like one-on-one, whereas I guess esports is more indicative of like team-based competition. So yeah, I've been a huge fan of esports. As someone who looks like me, I've been in this space for a long time, and it was just kind of one of those things where it's like we are a minority in a lot of ways, but we're definitely there. So I also am just a huge fan of visual novels, and I was like, visual novel esports, let's just like slap them together and see what happens. Because I think they're both actually quite niche pastimes. With things like Dream Daddy, I feel like that sort of shined a light on that community of people who do like to play visual novels. But like esports, I feel like it was a little unknown for a minute there, until people started looking around and realizing, oh, a visual novel is a game. Wow. Wow, I guess I can accept that now. So yeah, just my two personal interests coming together in game form.
What are some of the elements that sort of drew you into esports that you are representing in the game itself? Notice you have a very diverse group.
Yes.
For the team, is there like certain members of the team that you also sort of like model after, like maybe people who are famous within esports, or is it just sort of like certain caricatures that you sort of like pick up from other people who are also interested in esports?
Yeah, I would say it's a healthy mix of both. A lot of, the core five teammates that you spend a lot of your time with, um, they are people I know. I've come across people who are really into cosplay, or they're streamers. They are very sort of like focused and analytic and driven and kind of modest and quiet and reserved. Or they're very loud and brash and kind of toxic. So yeah, I would say the five core teammates are people that I've come across. And especially, them being non-men. So we do have a non-binary character who does have allegiances with womanhood, based on their kind of experiences in this scene. Um, but like I know these people, right? There's this misconception that it's like it's only dudes who are just like super into esports. It's only dudes who are playing competitively. It's only dudes who are good. But, I would say the whole time that I've been interested in competitive gaming, I've always gravitated towards, communities that prioritized women, communities that prioritized like general like ethnic inclusion. So, diverse sexualities. So a lot of it's one of those things where I guess it can kind of look deliberate. Like I did have in my head, oh, I want to reflect the things that I know to be true, but I didn't really have like, oh, like I need a quota, like I need to fill, this ethnicity or this sexuality or this gender. It was literally just sort of like looking around at the people I know who I'm really close to and I've spent a lot of time hanging out with, who are also very into esports and very committed to esports communities, and just being like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, in terms of like configuring a team with certain personalities that clash and certain personalities that get along very well, personalities that suit certain role types on the team. You've got your DPS player who's very, I would say, very brash, um, very aggressive, because you need to be, if that's how you're playing a game for like 12 hours a day. You've got your heal support, who's a bit more. I mean, I don't want to stereotype heal supports because you definitely have aggressive support players. Just I would say a bit more tolerant, maybe.
Sure. We'll go tolerant.
Tolerant, yeah, of behavior that's a little bit questionable sometimes. You have a position on the team that sort of caters towards like big brain thinking, like highly strategic approaches to understanding the game as it's evolving, being able to shot call, from that particular position, and then you've got like the tank player, someone who is, I guess, just kind of accustomed to being able to be aware of needing to support the team, but also like get big and get powerful and strong and soak damage. So when I was thinking about specifically starting with, the 5 roles for a MOBA game, for example, the map can change per any MOBA you're playing. There are tons out there and the maps can look very different, but I kind of went with one that was a little bit familiar to like the big ones, I would say.
The traditional
And then just
three
kind
lane.
of, yeah, exactly, traditional 3 lane, and then coming up with like the kind of personalities who trend towards playing those positions, and then filling out their hobbies, the things that they care about, the way that they carry themselves, and it just felt really natural, just very natural to sort of rely on people I know who I know are obsessed with certain character types, certain play styles. And also, just because I know them doesn't mean that people in general have this understanding that they're there. So it's very easy for me to, pull out the super, super cutesy like top laner who loves like big burly tank characters, but like in her actual life, just like loves really cute like plushies and pink, and like that's very normal to me. Those are my friends, right? I come across those people all the time. So just, yeah, I would say a mix of archetypes, but also just personal friends too.
And so now I have to ask, what is
Yes.
your archetype? Like, who are you when you're playing the traditional 3 laner?
Okay. All right. So I feel like this is a question that has 2 approaches.
Sure.
You have the real answer where it's like, who am I really?
Yeah.
And then you have the answer where you're like, no, this is how I wish I could be. So I would say on a good day, I sort of bounce back and forth between like DPS and support. I actually go back and forth between them because in the configuration of the map that I use for our game, they're like a duo. They kind of
Right.
need to rely on each other. So because I know both roles, it's kind of easy for me to go back and forth between the two. In theory, I would love to think of myself as like the big brained like jungler who like is 5 steps ahead of everybody, who's like in fog of war, like secretly stealing your camps,
Just
that
waiting for
just
your
like
gank.
exactly the one who's like who's very much like the chess player. But no, I'm definitely not. I'm not that person in real life when it comes to playing these games. So yeah, that's I will own up to flopping back and forth between like DPS and support based on, it's more like it's like a what mood you're in for
Yeah.
like a couple months, I think. Like I'll play support for a couple months. Also in response to like I do look at the patch notes and I look at what's strong and like, what champions have been like buffed and nerfed and all of that.
Right.
So I definitely am one of the kind of people where like if I'm trying to play seriously,
Mm-hmm.
then I will play according to what's strong.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I also sometimes you just want to have a match where it's super easy and you play what's familiar. So it's generally those two.
Well, as you mentioned, you happen to have like a support DPS sort of like relationship that
Yeah.
goes into it. How are you playing with like the relationships on in the digital world? Like your tanks,
Mm-hmm.
your support, your junglers versus the relationships that you're getting off screen, basically in the real
Yeah.
world. Like how do those two play off of each other? How do you go into it? And like also notice there was also antagonistic. So are we also looking
Mm-hmm.
for friends become enemies, enemies become lovers, sort of things that are also
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I would say the like any visual novel that sort of prioritizes relationships, you tend to have like meters, sort of like character progression meters or relationship progression meters. So you have like a spectrum of like, oh, are you going to just be a friend or are you going to potentially become more? So in High Elo Girls, we actually have, it's just like a general intimacy meter, wherein it's like on one end of the spectrum, you could just have a really close, intimate friendship. It could actually evolve into something else, but we kind of want to make sure that like friendship and romance are like weighted equally. It's not that like romance is the best possible ending and like friendship is just so.
mhm,
Like it's more that you can just become really close to someone, and that can flourish in a few different ways.
sure.
And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you can have like a full-on rival kind of like respectful like professional relationship, like your rivals, so you kind of push each other, but you can also just absolutely hate someone because of the way that your interactions in game have evolved over time. So when I was putting this together, we had always from the start had this idea that we would have in-game MOBA simulations. That would be like a core mini game mechanic. But it's always been one of those things where we wanted all of your decisions to matter in that sort of system. We didn't want it to just be like, oh, this is just like a skippable, boring mini game. It's kind of there to pad out the wider relationship based game. So I have been very lucky to be able to hire on a brilliant lead systems designer who is just like so good at coming up with the core foundational design for how our like MOBA simulations work in relation to a lot of the relationship variables that we have outside of the game. So actually, it's very much like like a competitive game wherein yes you might have like some nice cute moments with a teammate outside of game, but if you're very disrespectful to them when you're playing on a team with them, that engenders dislike or just kind of like what's going on here. So our simulations and our sort of like in-game MOBA setup is designed so that you can play it looking to be like the star of the game and kind of ignoring prompts from your teammates. But that does have out of game consequences. If you're not really playing as a team member, then they're likely not going to hang out with you when they have the downtime to do so. So our lead systems designer, Nemesis, has been amazingly good at making sure that the kind of decisions that you're offered in the MOBA simulations and the options you have in terms of making those decisions actually will deeply influence like who you've got access to on your team as like you guys are practicing and getting better and evolving those sort of team synergies. So it's very, very important that like our are sort of like, I'm going to take you through a MOBA mini game, actually has an impact on the way that your relationships evolve. So very critical.
So it seems like you are like you're thinking really into like esports, like you have like all
Yes.
the angles that are already in there. Can you talk about like a little bit of your background? Like you talked a little bit about like how you saw esports, but like have you gone into esports? Have you looked into like going going for like what like
Yeah.
it's like as you mentioned, like it's not easy going into esports,
Yes.
not as sort of the default character.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
what what do you like? What has been your sort of like reaction to some of that, and like is any of that changing in?
Yeah. Let's see. So, number one, straight off the bat, I am nowhere near competitive material. Like I am an aggressively average player. Like I know more than sort of like the casual player for any sort of competitive game that I get into, but I have no delusions about thinking that I'm ever going to get to the top of a ladder to the point where I am pro competitive material. I will say a long time ago, way back when we had MLG and game battles online, where you could literally recruit like, I don't know, four random people, like put together a team and then like play in a game online for $20. I did play a few of those.
That's huge.
And
That's
like
amazing.
it's 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 very interesting because it's one of those things where I think when you're younger, you'll sort of reach out to people just based on, you might have encountered them in a game and you're like, hey, I want to like practice together. And then like you might play a bunch of games together and you're like, hey, I want to do this dumb team thing. And then you do it. And then it ends up that you like end up practicing 4 hours a day. And you do end up forming sort of like legitimate team dynamics. I did sort of, I messed around with that a little bit when I when I was younger, and I still had delusions of, oh, this might be possible. But as you sort of like, the more you play, the more you realize that like, no, this is very serious. You do need to take it very seriously. These are the best of the best. You know, you don't just accidentally become good. You have to be very diligent. You have to be very regimented. For young teens, it tends to be just like that you're just real into the game. And so it's what you want to do, right? You come home from school and that's like the first thing you want to do. But you are essentially giving hours and hours of your life to a game and slowly becoming better because of it. So um, I I sort of casually found myself falling into that, but I would say I never had like a specific ambition to, oh, this game that I'm playing, I want to be the best of the best. And I want to get to the point where I'm being recruited, you know, where I have to have professional practices and I have a coach that reviews my footage and criticizes my gameplay and all of that. I never got that far. But I will say, you know, over the years, I've been a fan. I have definitely seen um, teams pop up for sure. And it's very clear that when they do pop up, they're composed of, in this case, it's usually women I'm talking about. They're composed of women who are competitors. You know, they are very serious about it. They're not just doing it because, you know, they're like, oh, we're gonna I guess, break the mold or we're going to be trailblazers. Like, yes, that is definitely something a lot of these teams are aware of, but like the actual players themselves are composed of people who play the game, who are very, very into the game and very serious about it and really do see themselves as potentially competing and winning. So, yeah, I would say, you know, in terms of is it changing? Something that I would see at least a couple times a year, every year for a while there was, where are the women in esports? You know, like where are the winners, essentially? And you know, you would always have people debating, oh well, you know, they don't have fast twitch reflexes like men do. The very sort of bioessentialist approach to like, why are women not winning trophies? And I mean, I used to be more respectful of that perspective, like, oh, well, people can agree to disagree. at this point in my life, I'm very firmly against the idea that there is some sort of genetic benefit to being a man, that makes you win. But it's that sort of rhetoric that's also out there,
Yeah. Well,
that's very unwelcoming to women who would actually want to take that seriously. And so I have actually seen some leagues. There is one league in particular that has a Game Changers program that's specifically designed to court. I think it's non-men, but I think they probably prioritize women who are high up on the ladder. People who have the real potential to convert from just like super high elo players to actual like professional competitors. They have to frequently be like, so up on the ladder. There are typically, in ladder systems, there might be like 8 or 9 or maybe 10 ranks, and I would say I'm squarely in the middle, but they're courting people who are maybe like the top or second to top rank, or even like the third, which there's room for them to improve to the second, the penultimate rank, or the top rank. And they're recruiting, women and non-men from those ranks, people who are competitively viable.
mhm.
So I've seen initiatives like that pop up within the last year or two, which is really promising because from my perspective, I'm very much of the opinion that you need infrastructure, you need systemic change, and you need active pursuit of these people who are hidden and potentially hiding themselves intentionally to avoid the sort of harassment that they would get. You need the structural financial support from the top down, rather than just relying on like my approach in High Elo Girls. They're a bunch of scrappy, like grassroots bottom up players. But I do firmly think that you actually need to start from the top, and you need to be actively demonstrating to these people who aren't sure that they can do it, not because they're not technically capable, but because they don't have the cultural support. Yeah, I've started to see leagues attempting to do that. So I'm cautiously optimistic. It's been a long time. Like these economies have, I would say, people are now aware that esports is like $1 billion industry because there's been external funding from like VCs, and traditional sports players are starting to invest in teams. But this has been going on for decades at this point. So it's about time where like we've actually pushed the conversation to the point where, no, like, you guys who are running the leagues actually need to put your money where your mouth is if you want to see change here. So yeah, I've heard reports that like some of these initiatives are going quite well. Some of the female players are encouraged, actually feel like they have a chance of like ending up on the stage professionally. So yeah, I would say I'm skeptical, but I'm also cautiously optimistic.
I think that's probably the best outcome that you can probably put together.
Yeah.
Just to sort of like shift a little bit. Obviously, this is a game. This is a game about esports, but it is also a game about relationships. And
Yes.
this is not your first time going into games about relationships. So the question comes down to like, how do you create good romantic relationships within games, or what for you uh,
Yes.
creates a good romantic relationship?
So for me, it can vary. I think people are drawn to different types of fantasy fulfillment. I was talking to someone the other day about like the fake dating setup that, it's like, oh, well, we're two coworkers, or we're forced together for some reason, and we have to we have to pretend that we like each other, and then we realize that, oh, we do actually kind of like each other. Like that's like a fantasy romantic trope. That's one way into, exploring relationship dynamics in games. And I think that that's a fun one. It may not necessarily be like a super realistic one, but I also don't think that game relationships need to be realistic in order to be impactful, like, and emotionally memorable. But with something like High Elo Girls, it's it's messy because you are essentially having like you're fraternizing at work. You're having, like complicated professional
Yeah.
relationships. Um, and so, in the case very specifically of High-Low Girls, I wanted to go at it from the perspective of, okay, everybody is here because they have a dream, they have a goal, and they're very serious about it. And they won't get sidetracked by, or I didn't want to depict them being sidetracked by like superfluous, sort of like kind of like kind of ridiculous distractions, because they're very serious. They're here for a reason. So a lot of the ways that you develop intimacy in High-Low Girls revolves around respecting what they're there for. It's respecting their time, it's respecting their goals. It's acknowledging that they have interests outside of what they're there for, but also, sort of respecting how they view themselves. And I think the foundation for a good, memorable relationship in a game, no matter how it starts, has to go back to that mutual respect. And they have to just sort of, you may not necessarily have to understand every facet of a person, but you have to be earnest and sincere in your approach to acknowledging who they are, and what they care about. So I feel like there are so many ways you can dress that up in any sort of like game situation and game environment. It's not a space opera, so they're not like trying to save a planet or anything. But they do have to come together to overcome personal conflicts. Um, and just kind of really see each other. And I think that being able to see like the essence of a person or a character is what builds that strong foundation for like a really compelling relationship. And it could be a very, very close friendship. Um, I'm taking the view that a lot of really good fictional romances can start with friendship. um, and it can evolve into something where like it's like heart palpitating and stuff. So, but also I will say there are those moments where like they just really impressed each other too. Like, oh, you did this is really corny. Oh, you pulled off that like super sick play. That's awesome. Like I wish I could do that. But it's like cool that you're good enough to do that. Like those sort of moments of like,
I saw you across there
oh,
doing a quadra kill.
yeah, 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 and
Oh
stuff like
my.
that. Yeah. Oh my
Oh.
gosh. Oh my
Oh
god. Yeah.
gosh.
And it's like, and it's funny and it's silly, but it's also like for people who literally spend 12 hours a day doing a thing, demonstrating, like competence at the thing is actually quite appealing. So, so, yeah, I would say it comes down to, for me, making sure that there's like a foundation of respect there. Intrigue is a good one. Friendship is also good, and overcoming personal conflict.
So what sort of brought you into the world of video games? What were some of your first memories of games that sort of like touched your heart, or like made you be like, I want to be a part of like this sort of like this world?
Well, it's funny because it was definitely a game that I was too young to be playing. I
Uh-huh.
got into video games through Mortal Kombat.
There you go.
Like I was very young. I don't even think I was a teenager yet. And I was like, "Oh my gosh. Like this is so violent and there's so much blood and the combos are so cool." And also the girls were really awesome. Like I was immediately like back then I didn't realize that they were all sort of like color copies of each other. Like literally it was the same character with
Just
their
swap everyone
leotard.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like a color swap. But they had different weapons, so it was
Yeah.
fine. Um and yeah, I remember being really drawn to these really cool, powerful girls who were just like kicking ass in this Mortal Kombat tournament. And again, it's funny how something so violent just like really caught my attention and really made me feel like, ooh, like like I want to play games and I want to be in games. And I think that kind of that that level of competing against other people, but doing it while looking really cool, using really cool weapons and looking like a hot girl, you know, like I was like, yeah, this is the place for me. Like, like this is where I should be. So yeah, it's funny. I talk to people and they're like, oh, I got in because of something super wholesome or just like warm, like, oh, Pokemon. Not tech, I mean, like you're having like Pokemon battle for their
Yeah,
lives.
they're
So it's not
battling for their
necessarily
lives. You're basically forcing them to fight each other.
exactly. It's not necessarily super wholesome, but like there's more wholesome aesthetics than like violent X-ray bloody combos that you get in something
Sure.
like Mortal Kombat. Um, and yeah, it's just funny. I have to be like, yeah, I really liked Katana and Melina. Like I loved those girls. The whole like twin dynamic thing. One's like half monster. Yeah, I vibe with that. I'm good. So yeah. And then I ended up getting into things like Halo, and you know, I preferred Halo always over stuff like Call of Duty, but like the mechanics were quite simple and similar in terms of like, oh, you're in an arena and you're running around and you're like fighting other people. So yeah. And then because Halo had like a really big competitive gaming scene, you just kind of like I ended up following that community and like slotting into that community, and then it's been that uh ever since, basically.
So if there's like a sequel to this game, will the next one be like on first-person shooters?
It's so, oh my gosh. It's really funny because my team, I love them. We're constantly like, so what would like the next genre of game be? Like, would it be something like a Valorant style? Because again, I would want to do like the thing with the fictional game in Hilo Girls, Reckoners of Forsaken Lands, Raffle. um it's like kind of like a sci-fi speculative fiction, like fantasy dystopia type of setup. It's very much like a fantasy sort of world as opposed to something that's more real world adjacent, like a Call of Duty.
Sure.
I just personally don't really vibe with those types of shooter games, even though I do like shooters quite a bit. So yeah, it's like, oh, would we do like a Valorant, or would we do some other style of competition? Would we do like FGC? Because again, I have spent a good amount of time in the FGC. I've gone to lots of FGC tournaments, and I'm very bad, so I've never tried to compete. Like I've never also, again, I've never had delusions that I could ever compete on that level. But like I have my favorite players. I follow their careers. So yeah, we've thought like, ooh, we could do something like an arena shooter, like a Valorant style, or we could do something like a Mortal Kombat or a Street Fighter style of game. We've thought about it and talked about it probably more than we should, but but yeah, it is one of those things where if we did do some sort of sequel, which is really getting ahead of ourselves, but
Sure.
if we did, we would want to explore a different kind of competitive gaming community.
Absolutely. Obviously, there's a lot of people in the audience who also want to get into video games. They want to be writers.
Yes.
They want to be designers.
Yes.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
what would someone who's just starting out, or maybe they're getting out of college right about
Mm-hmm.
now, what would you tell them in order to get to where you are? Because it seems like you've got a number of games under your belt. You just had a very part of a very successful Kickstarter with cryptids.
Ooh,
Uh,
wild.
like
Again, very wild for me, but yes.
you wear many hats going into it. So what
Mm-hmm.
kind of what do you got to say to them?
So let's see. I think there are a few institutions now that have gotten a lot better at bridging the gap between what you study and what you need to prepare for in terms of looking for jobs. I think there are quite a few that are doing a good job on that front. But I would also say pick your discipline, because I do understand that a lot of courses are designed to give you sort of access to a lot of different fields and a lot of different skill sets. So I would say pick one. If you really like writing, learn learn as much as you can about writing structures. Specifically, there are there are things in game writing that are quite different from like book writing or comics writing. So I would say just really try to hone your specific skill as much as possible. And I would look at games that you really like, and games that you think have done that specific thing very well. I would look for the people who are involved in those. I would see if they've written anything about it. Chances are they might have an ebook that that you can have a look at. I've actually been reading and just sort of checking out some narrative design books that I think are just kind of helping me to broaden my skill set, because I feel like it's something that you're constantly working on. I don't think it's something that you're ever going to just like completely master and stop, since games evolve so much. So what's actually well suited for high-low girls, which is a very text-heavy, prose-heavy style of game with a good amount of dialogue, may not be well suited to something like unpacking, which has literally, like, I think it's got like 4 lines of text that might show after you complete a level, but the narrative design is very strong. It's very, like, you understand the story even though it's told through moving objects around. So I would definitely say pick games that you're like, oh man, I really like how they executed this particular um, I guess, portion of development, and then try to suss out what what went into that process. It's kind of like reverse engineering almost, and then making as many like small games as you can. I don't have too many of my small games live for download, but like I got into Twine. I messed around with that. I am using RenPy, which is a free engine for visual novels. That's one thing, is like sometimes it's very hard to have access to expensive engines, for example, because the licenses are super expensive. But if you're fresh out of school, you might still have a working student license.
Right.
Take advantage of that as much as possible. But yeah, go for the free stuff as well. Like for example, I'm constantly working on narrative design, and there is I would say probably standard in the space. mShort has a blog that is like a treasure trove of knowledge about how to do narrative design well, has like recommendations, has outbound links to like point you in the direction of books, and just sort of blog posts about different types of strategic approaches to design, especially since something like narrative design, I would say, is relatively new, in terms of, or maybe it's not necessarily new, it's just that it's what it's called now is it's quite new, because
Right.
people have been doing narrative design in games for a long time, but it's more that it's starting to like become a concrete discipline. So definitely, if you can find an mShort of like 3D animation, or an mShort of production, someone who is very experienced and very generous with their knowledge in terms of like a public blog or workshops, follow them. Like, just like like read their writing, check out their work, because they're probably talking about the process, and you can learn a lot for sure. So unfortunately, I guess the short answer is keep learning. Like, you are a newly graduated student, and the learning never stops. So look for free ways to learn after you have graduated from school.
I think that is a fair assessment of like how everything works. Is just keep learning. Don't stop
Yeah.
learning. Don't stop. Can't stop.
Don't stop. Don't stop.
But yes, I'm gonna say that is amazing, Dani. Uh, thank you for being with us today.
Of
Where
course.
can we find more about the game and more about you?
Yes. So Hilo Girls is actually on Steam. You can hit us up. We do have like a bit.ly link that it's like bit.ly/hi Elo Girls. That'll take you right to Steam, and you can wishlist us there. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at Epistellar. So just EPISTELLAR. I had to think about how to
It's
spell
okay.
it.
It's okay.
But yeah, I would say those two are the most sort of relevant in terms of, being able to keep up with something like Hi Elo Girls and then my personal Twitter. But we also do have a studio Twitter, which is split_fate. And that's kind of where we're posting teasers and updates about, like, art progression, little character interactions, that sort of thing, as we're just sort of chugging along on development for Hi Elo Girls.
Beautiful. Well, I can't wait to play it and can't wait for it to come out. So once again, thank you very much, and I hope everyone gets a chance to check it out once it comes out. So
Yes. Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
excellent, excellent. Yeah, and that'll be it for today.